All right, hello, Aaron, Erica, and Commissioner Reyes. Good to see you all. Turned out to be a beautiful day here in Hoboken. A little bit chilly in the morning, but it cleared up nicely.
That's good. Going to be 70 tomorrow here in the DC area.
Ah, nice. I think we're still one short of a quorum.
And one one beer short of a six-pack, is it?
Yeah, well, usually.
So while we're waiting, Frank, why don't you pull that guitar off the wall and hum us a few tunes?
But then you won't be able to get me to stop once I get going.
There you go.
Do you think people forgot that we have 2 meetings this week?
Well, let's hope not. I just texted Dave and I haven't heard back from him. Maybe I'll do the circuit.
I know, Erica, that board sent out a notice on Friday afternoon. So everyone just reminding them. Just for that reason, I think.
I'll make a round of texts here just to touch base with everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioner.
Special board meeting.
Yes. Commissioner Sanford's getting on shortly. Commissioner Sanford says it'll be about 10 minutes.
Do we have a quorum now?
Yes, we do. And as vice chair, if you'd like to proceed, we certainly could.
Yeah, I don't have the materials in front of me, but
Counselor, is there any problem with me when it's appropriate to read the Open Public Meetings Act announcement?
No problem at all.
Okay, very good.
so
So,
I think we should start unless anybody else feels differently.
No, let's do it.
Okay,
so let's proceed. Very good.
so call to order. Director, can you take the roll call, please? Oh, or we do the
Sure.
pledge first?
We can do the pledge first, I think. Yes.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can you take the roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. A. Impastato,
Here.
A. Lewitt. I think you're muted, Aaron.
He's having a hard time.
But with American Sign Language, we could tell he said here.
Here, he said here.
D. Mello, B.
There you go.
Reyes. M. Russo, J. Sanford, E. Seitzman.
Present.
Very good. And so I will proceed with the Open Public Meetings Act. This is the announcement regarding the notice. I would like to advise those present that the notice of this special meeting of the Housing Authority of the City of Hoboken has been provided to the public in accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meeting Act. Notice of this special November board meeting has been scheduled for Tuesday, November 16th, was sent to the Jersey Journal and Star Ledger on Tuesday, November 2nd, as notification to the general public of said meeting and sent to the city clerk of Hoboken on Tuesday, November 2nd, with a copy of the agenda to be posted on the aforementioned bulletin board. I direct the minutes of this meeting to state that I have announced that adequate notice of this meeting has been given as required by the Open Public Meetings Act. In addition, I direct that the minutes of this meeting to state the following. As a result of the restrictions established by the Executive Order 107 by the Governor of New Jersey, with respect to the need to limit public gatherings to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, the meeting will be conducted exclusively through the use of communications equipment. This procedure is in accordance with NJSA 10-4-9.3, which states that a public body shall not be deemed to have violated any provision of the Open Public Meetings Act in conducting a meeting by means of communication or other electronic equipment. In addition, this procedure complies with Article 3, Section 7 of the Authority Bylaws, which allows for participation in authority meetings by members of the Board of Commissioners by means of telephone conference or similar communications equipment. And anything, Counselor, that should be added to that for tonight's meeting?
Yes, sir, if I may. Those of you who participate in general are familiar with the next part of what we say at a regular meeting. This is a special meeting. It has a specific and limited purpose, and that single purpose is going to be to discuss the repositioning issues of the authority. So there won't be any discussion of any other issue. And additionally, there will not be any formal action taken. And because of the nature of this meeting, there won't be an opportunity for public comment in accordance with our usual procedures that occurs at open regular meetings and special meetings similar to the regular meetings. And I'll point out, if anybody does have an interest in making a comment on anything they hear tonight, that can be done in 2 days at the regular meeting of the authority, which occurs on Thursday of this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. And I'd like to welcome all of our guests tonight. We appreciate the planning team that I work so closely with being here tonight. As many of you know, we've been on this journey for a little while now. We've had stakeholder meetings throughout Hoboken. We have had resident meetings on a continuing basis. We have had our interactive design process meeting last month. We have been gathering comments. We've been gathering ideas. This package is starting to come together. And excuse me, what I'd like to do, what we'd like to accomplish tonight is to make sure that the board is completely up to date on where we are, what our thinking is, what input we've gotten, and what direction we're going. We are still looking at having this plan put together and published right at the beginning of 2022. So we're looking at January, February of 2022. Probably by the middle of January, we're going to be ready to start really finalizing this. So we've got some information to absorb. We've got some decisions to be made between now and then. And what we'd like to do tonight is to get you up and rolling on everything that's happened, so you can see the latest and the community can see the latest. By virtue of the special meeting, we'll be taking community comments, as the counselor just said, at our special board meeting. But tonight is to focus on where we are, what we've learned, and how the plan looks now. What I would like to ask is, as we go around tonight and folks speak, if you could say your name first for the convenience of our wonderful Teresa, who's transcribing tonight, so she can get your names right. I think she knows most of us here at Hoboken, but she doesn't know everyone on the call that well and knows your voices. So if you could say your name first as you speak, that would be appreciated. So that's what we want to accomplish tonight. We want to get you up to date. We want to get you to know exactly what we're thinking of, where we're headed with this most important project. And I want to emphasize those 3 words: most important project. This is crucial for the future of Hoboken and the future of the Hoboken Housing Authority. We have a housing authority that is 70 some years old on our buildings, and we must do something. We must move forward, and this is the opportunity to do it. So we're looking forward to presenting to you where we've been in our hours of planning and thinking, and talk a little bit about what we have to do still to get this plan ready. So when we hit that first quarter of 2022, we're ready to go. We want to be on the ground, off and running, and applying for our first rounds of funding and making this happen. So thank you all for being here. And given that, our leader, Troy McGee, I will hand it over to you to say a few words, and you can introduce your team and take it from there. Troy, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Recco. Again, for the record, my name is Troy McGee and I'm with Torty Gallison Partners. Just like to thank everybody for coming out this evening. I think Mr. Recco and Mr. Fitzpatrick covered a lot of what we really want to accomplish today. And like I said, like they were saying, it's key to, we're going to present this information, and we would really like everybody to give us the time to present the information. We have an outline that you'll see in this presentation, which will be covered by the team. And then after that, we would like to field questions if anybody has any. But like Mr. Recco and Mr. Fitzpatrick were saying, this is the goal of really just to keep this thing moving and keep the momentum going and keep it moving in the right direction. This is where we need your input and us all working together to come to consensus on the direction of this master plan effort. I'd like to just take the time, if folks can wave. We have Brian Tomeno with Torty Gallison Partners. He's going to lead the presentation effort. We also have David Stemble, Danielle Latoni, Jaime Bordenave with the Communities Group, and John Berry with Higher Gruel. So this is the team that's going to lead the presentation. I just don't want to take up too much time so that they can, go through and have enough time to present this to you all. And just thank you for your time. And I'll turn it over to Brian to lead it off.
As we do that, Brian, I'd like to note that Commissioner Michael Russo has joined us as well. Welcome, Commissioner Russo.
Thank you very much, Director.
Brian.
Great. Lourdes, do you think I can share my screen?
Angel will allow you to share the screen. Angel.
Ready.
Great, thank you. Again, just for the record, my name is Brian Tomeno. I'm a master planner at Torty Gallison Partners. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Great. So as Troy said, there's, we just wanted to talk about the outline of today. This is, we've been working a lot on and meeting with a lot of different groups throughout Hoboken in the last several months. And we wanted to make sure that the board was up to date as much as we are on what's going on. And this meeting primarily is to present like our draft concept design and phasing in full. And then get some after I'm finished kind of running through this, we'd love to field questions and comments from the board. And then ideally we'll be able to share this with you, this document with the commissioners, so you can review it on your own time. And then we'll come back on Thursday during the regular board meeting where the public and you can comment, and we can answer follow-up questions if you have any as you kind of digest the package. Tonight, we'll go through some analysis. Not all of the analysis, we've done a ton, but just some key points that will help kind of frame our narrative here. Review and recap the public outreach and stakeholder engagement that we've done, and then get into the design parameters of the study, how we kind of started, how we framed, how can we look at this, and getting into the actual design of the whole campus, as well as the phasing, all of the properties in the phasing. So just starting off at a very high level here, literally altitude-wise, this is just an overview of the parcels that the Housing Authority owns and controls. And a list of all the amount of units that we are in charge of redeveloping. So, number one, Foxhill Gardens, as you all know, is in process right now. There are 200 units being renovated there. We are going to be looking at the rest of the parcels and acknowledging there's a total of 1354, but in our study will be the goal will be to replace those 1,154 units. They'll be either preserved or renovated or redeveloped. But we like to state at every turn of this project, everyone knows that there will be no one losing their housing from redevelopment here. Next, one second. Okay, so this is just one of our analysis diagrams of the street network around the main campus of Hoboken, which is kind of the primary focus of where we'll be talking tonight. Obviously, it has the most distinction of being a large campus, and I'll be referring to the main campus, which is, as you know, Andrew Jackson Gardens and Harrison Gardens. But close by is Monroe and Adams Senior, both kind of senior housing. And to the north is Christopher Columbus. As you can see here, as you all know very well, and that we learned as we drive our rental cars every time, there are a bunch of one-way streets. I imagine you guys get used to it, but it's difficult for visitors. But one thing is extra difficult is when you get into the main campus, the lack of connectivity from the street grid of Hoboken, the lack of the very much of a change in the feeling of what the rest of Hoboken is to the housing authority. There's also not a great way to turn around very quickly in a lot of these streets. And there are also some buildings that are in the way of the old street grid that kind of block connections and ways to walk, ways to ride bikes, ways to drive in and out of the project. Another big thing we can notice here is the way that the train tracks along the Palisades literally act as a backstop to the campus and kind of to Hoboken at this point in the project. It's not a great place to be back there. It's kind of an afterthought in a lot of ways, and that's one thing we noticed in our observations as a possible value add. Another quick piece here is the blue lines. Note the special focus overlay is a terminology used in the 2019 Hoboken Street Design Guide, and it's meant to. That was a kind of one of several overlay districts in Hoboken that they want to emphasize. The city wants to emphasize as special streets, that understanding that this one is along a lot of parks, and it is a well-used circulation pattern and worth maybe some more investment in focus. I think the other thing just to mention is we've done, within our analysis is we've incorporated and read a lot of the existing and very current up-to-date planning documents from the city in an effort to understand their goals and to weave them into our goals. So there's not too much conflict going forward in getting this approved with all of the different approval processes we have to do to get this to be implemented and to be real. That's another kind of theme, is to making this as real and as practical as possible to get it to work. The next big issue, as you are all very aware, is flooding and stormwater, both in surge events like Hurricane Sandy or later ones, the other ones this year, but also rain events that are happening more often that cause severe flooding, especially around the main campus in the southwestern part of Hoboken. So we took a look at what the city has master planned for. There are some federal rebuild by design projects that we want to incorporate and not reinvent the wheel here, but essentially make sure that our project is woven into those larger larger plans to fix the stormwater, and at the same time that our plan will do all it can comprehensively to mitigate flooding. One big thing is just understanding the design flood elevation, which means that any housing, non-commercial uses have to be above the design flood elevation. And in this case, the main campus, as well as Christopher Columbus, is an elevation of 13.7 feet. Take into account the latest maps that City of Hoboken is looking to use as a regulation. And then Adams and Monroe is a foot lower at 12.7 feet. But this just means that most of the main campus is at like elevation 2 to 4. So there'll be a level below the elevation that can accommodate everything but residential. So we're going to look at, we'll show you in a second, but we'll look at parking and community services as well as potential commercial space. Public outreach and stakeholder engagement. You guys are, I think, hopefully are aware of all the meetings that we've been through. I know I've seen a lot of you there at those meetings. Thank you for your attendance and participation. But starting out in June, and I think even a little earlier with some smaller meetings, but we've been meeting with everyone from city officials to government leaders, community leaders, and including education and nonprofit leaders, kind of trying to get a consensus, communication at least, a consensus of everyone's thoughts on what could be better about this project and how can they help. We've met with the residents at several occasions, the big ones being August 11th, which we had a tremendous turnout. And the chart on the right is kind of a download of what we heard there. We had a great breakout sessions out on Mama Johnson Field. Site and building and unit concerns were the overwhelming one, as expected usually. But in this case, everyone acknowledges the state of the buildings are, most of the buildings are they're old, they're 60 to 80 years old and are approaching the end of their lifetime. So it kind of bakes into the idea that understanding and kind of a consensus that most of the main campus seems to be needing to be redeveloped, as in demolished and rebuilt. And then we had our interactive design workshop on September 29th, through October 1st. It was a little less well attended, to be honest, than the resident meeting, but we did have a good group of stakeholders. We met with the city infrastructure folks, as well as the clergies and several residents groups we did speak with and meet with as well. So it was a good mix of people. And we also had a resident follow-up meeting last week that kind of brought the residents up to speed to a similar presentation. So just getting into the design parameters of the study. This means kind of the ground rules, right? When we start to do a master plan, we need to understand what are the limitations, what are the opportunities, and kind of even the metrics to work within. This is not all going to be Manhattan, Hudson Yards skyscrapers, right? We understand that there's a practical limit to what we want to study, and then we can base our numbers off of that, what we know are practical numbers, and be honest with the numbers that we're providing. So starting off, the number one most important one obviously is keeping that, preserving the 1354 units will be rebuilt or renovated across the entire site. And again, in our area of focus, it'll be 1154, which acknowledges that Foxhill Garden is already in process with 200 units. Another big one is we've heard consensus-wise across many stakeholder groups, including the city, including the Housing Authority too, is establish and including the residents feedback is weaving the campus and the Housing Authority back into Hoboken. So there's not such a great visual and physical divide of them versus us across Jackson Street in particular, where there's a clear distinction of when you're in Housing Authority property. So establishing a grid, the regular street grid. We also understanding that Christopher Columbus is likely to be completely redeveloped, but the senior buildings are much younger in their age and have some qualities about them that we are thinking could be utilized to be either substantial or gut renovated projects, similar to Fox Hill. And that also could play into factors about how to finance those and get some different ways to finance that would help, kind of diversify the funding and allow for a little bit more expediency in the project. And then just talking about the types of buildings we studied to kind of give you a unit yield. We're studying these six-story buildings, which is essentially 5 stories over residential. And I'll speak to that in the next slide. And a gross square foot number per unit. So we take these kind of large areas, as these buildings are not designed down to the units yet. We just take these kind of block diagrams, understand the gross square feet, and then we can kind of generate an amount of units that is appropriate to the bedroom types that we are trying to replace. And of course, incorporate comprehensive open space and stormwater strategies. So typical block size, I talked about this, I'll be quick. If you look at, there's a kind of a Hoboken block that is, a very pedestrian oriented scale. It's also very efficient for lots of building types, but in particular, the ones that we'll be studying, which want to have a kind of a module of parking underneath that is efficient to construct, efficient and economical to construct in the concrete portion of a building. And then above, have enough dimension to make courtyards that are livable and desirable, and have enough dimension to have multifamily buildings on top that have kind of corridors in the middle. And so a 200 by 420 is kind of an average block we found that we use to kind of overlay here on the left. You can see we overlaid those blocks, kind of just very simply extending them back like they probably used to be at one point in history. And then when there is a constraint, that's where we would make an irregular shaped block, but still try to make it as regular as possible.
I would like to note very quickly that Commissioner Sanford has joined us. Welcome, Commissioner Sanford.
Thank you. So going into just building type again, this is the parameters for our study. We looked at everything at this 6-story level, which is a size of building that has been built in Hoboken, especially in the last decade or so. You can see a lot of blocks being redeveloped in this size. There is an economy of scale to this type. This is the max allowed of wood you can build over one level of concrete. For the construction nerds in the audience, it is a type 3A construction over a type 1A construction. So it's essentially a fireproofed, fire protected base that has a 5-story level, at least, or up to 5 levels of wood on top. But this is kind of a section cut through the building. So you can see the idea that the ground floor could provide with parking, as well as ample space for community or commercial spaces, either on the short end or the long end of the buildings. And then on top of that kind of fire protected concrete podium, as we call it, above the flood elevation, there would be an opportunity to have landscaped courtyards that will be semi-private or private for the residents. Another desire that we heard from the residents, and it's just good practice, is to provide the plan with a variety of open spaces, some that are public, some that are private, some that are semi-private. So kind of a mix of sizes and types is always good for a plan. These are some examples of Hoboken and some examples that our firm has built recently of this building type. Ground floor, there's a parking entrance on this picture here on the right. The picture in the middle is of a courtyard raised above, and then in Hoboken there was some interesting types that have the courtyard that opens up to the street, kind of a U-shaped building, and then you actually can walk up into the courtyard from the street above, getting up to that above that concrete level, which is something that was mentioned, brought up by some residents and the resident advisory board, and we thought that would be an intriguing way to kind of join some of these spaces and open up some of these buildings. Okay, that was a lot of analysis and parameter talk. I'm going to get into the actual plan now. So here is a perspective view, an overhead perspective view of our proposed concept plan, or study, I should say. As you can see, Mama Johnson Field's preserved and really becomes the heart of the project. If it is already kind of a heart of the neighborhood, a heart of housing authority property. And in this case, we want to frame it with bigger buildings that help kind of frame it as a hub, a community hub, so to speak. And perhaps look at the way you guys use Mama Johnson Field as maybe more of a multi-use. Maybe there's some expansion of it that creates a diversity of activities, not just sports, but possibly other activities at all times of the year. So this plan on the left is kind of the site plan. It's facing north. There are a couple of things we wanted to talk about as kind of the upper level design strategies that we wanted to incorporate that kind of, again, weaves everything together and hopefully creates a great neighborhood. Number one, we mentioned it earlier, is restoring the street grid to typical block sizes. Number two is proposing a neighborhood scaled resiliency park, or as you probably are aware, there's an effort with the city to create what they're calling resiliency parks, kind of distributed throughout Hoboken. Resiliency as in stormwater resiliency, where those parks could incorporate the storm surge and actually store the water during those surges points, eliminating the need for it to flood. And then that could either be pumped out or drained slowly after the event happens. They've been successful in other ones. There's been discussion about New Jersey Transit has been planning on their own for their parcels of land, which is just west of our piece, the land that they own, adjacent to the actual light rail tracks. There's the thought is that maybe we provide some regular edge to that and create a larger park that becomes instead of an undesirable back of a neighborhood, it becomes another front and a possible amenity. There's enough dimension there to have park space before the light rail that you would feel like you're in a park. And along with that park is extending Marshall Street, which Marshall Street is down here now. In the current form, there is just kind of a cul-de-sac light rail station pickup. There is literally a fence at the end where you cannot walk from the northern part of the housing authority down. But we're proposing adding a two-way street there that kind of, again, legitimizes the backside of this project, the western side of this project, into a desirable front. It creates opportunity and value to these buildings that have fronts to that side, instead of thinking about that as something you have to kind of hide. And also steps back the housing a little bit further from the light rail and creates a park view. And also with the upper levels of these buildings, a beautiful view of the Palisades, which is a natural amenity worth celebrating. So the two-way street is important with the circulation. It will help these one-way streets kind of resolve your driving and walking and biking. And we mentioned the term complete street, which is a term the city uses in a lot of their terminology that they use in there, but it's also a national term of creating streets that are not just for automobiles, but for pedestrians and bike riders and people with disabilities. Everybody can kind of enjoy the street and have the freedom of choice on types of ways to get around, ways to be mobile. I think it's an important aspect that could kind of connect the entire project together. I mentioned already reinforces Mama Johnson Field as a community hub. And by going to the next one is locating ground floor use zone. So, there'll be opportunities and need to provide ground floor uses that aren't parking, but ones that would activate the street. So In orange here, this is again just a study of potential spaces, but you could imagine that this field is surrounded by community service buildings, food banks. I know desire some long-term storage space on the site, as well as a lot of nonprofit organizations that want to have some indoor community space to help your residents succeed. After school learning, job training, those types of things. Even the potential for educational uses, working with the city could be a possibility, right? So thinking ways to frame the parks and public spaces with those uses and create an energy at those areas. Similarly, along 3rd Street, we're thinking that if you were going to put commercial or small retail, perhaps a grocery store, perhaps a small grocery store, or perhaps daily service retail like a pharmacy or things the residents need, could be located along, in a critical mass along 3rd Street as kind of like a main street to the project that is also close to the light rail and would get foot traffic, get tenants, the foot traffic that tenants desire and need to sign these leases. On the southern side of the site, we wanted to talk about, maybe there's some potential public space that is currently the old electrical station. Maybe that becomes more of a hardscape plaza that is connected to the light rail. It's connected to the housing authority projects, and kind of acts as another meeting place for people. That this could be where farmers markets or seasonal events could happen as well. And then providing a diversity on that same note is providing a diversity of defined open space types. So we pulled back the buildings on block up here in Block D, creating some pocket parks that might be different in nature than the activities that go on in Mama Johnson Field. We pulled back a kind of a linear park along B2 and F2 here along 3rd Street. Perhaps that's a place where there's some outdoor park space to have a bite to eat or meet with friends. And of course, the Resiliency Park being kind of a linchpin throughout the whole, the western edge. So I'm going to get into phasing now, and then I'm going to go through that phasing hopefully pretty quick. But I just wanted to talk about the biggest principle of us not displacing any residents. It's very important to start with a new building, to get a new building built, which we call build first, and get everybody start moving people into that as soon as you can, to free up space to then start building, to start kind of the domino effect of phasing. So it's build first, residents move in, and then we demolish what those residents used to live in, creating developable areas and blocks that we can then kind of build upon and go forward. So what we did in the beginning was look at what build first sites could be possible. And I want to start by saying that, to maximize success and minimize risk, we didn't want to depend on land that was rumored to be available or possibly to be available that the housing authority didn't own, or that was currently a park. Those kind of things, while they certainly could and should be studied and developed by the board, developed by the housing authority as possibilities, we can't rely on that to make a plan that would fail in the first phase if that site fell through. So we did look, for example, the former substation owned by the city now has been transferred and environmentally cleaned up to a degree. But we can't rely on that as a possibility until it's more of a definitive nature. That goes with the community garden on 3rd Street. Prior studies I think looked at that as a first phase, but we don't know if we can own it. It's also that and Mama Johnson is owned or is on the state of New Jersey's Green Acres list program, which is a kind of a park preservation program that's very hard to get removed from once you get put on it legally. And so it would be a very long process to do that, and we didn't want to start there. So we did look at, we did look at Mama Johnson Field. Not only is it on that list, but it's also a community, hub already, and it's a place that people know. And we were hesitant to build on something in that fashion and kind of take it away for a substantial amount of time. So we decided not to build there. But looking on our properties, on the Housing Authority properties, we decided that the Harrison lot, the parking lot on the Harrison parcel is a great example of underutilized space. So surface parking lot in a dense city like Hoboken, it stands out as an obvious place to build. And so we selected that as our first phase to go forward with. It provides dimensions that a building can be built on. It's not the biggest building, but it provides enough density to get the ball rolling on a practical and implementable plan, we think. So in this case, this is kind of the diagrams that we'll just go through all of the different phases to just talk about how possibly this could work. There are certainly tweaks to what buildings could be replaced here and there. There are some larger strategies of phasing that we want to talk about maybe after I'm done. But I'm just going to go through, this is a kind of our first pass at a very simplistic way, but also, like we said, practical way to get large buildings built quickly. And so, we look at the site and realize that the buildings in the back, 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, all the way back, those are all 49 unit buildings, right? They're all cruciform 7-story buildings that have a lot of density. So it's hard to replace those first. But the advantage of the mix of types that you currently have, the smaller units like 1.3, 1.5, these kind of garden styles up here, there are small 3-story units that are spread out on a lot of land. So there's a lot of land, not a lot of density. So we looked at those as a first phase. So if you add up, the amount of units that are in these that are highlighted here from 1.3 to 1.7, sorry, 1.13, 1.17, it accumulates to about 115 units, and that happens to be what we can realistically fit in this build first. So the idea is 1A, we build this building. After that building's built and ready for residents, those residents from this red outline area could move into the new building, and then we could demolish that to prepare that site for the next phase. So that would be 115 units. And as you can see on here, I added a kind of, I call it a cumulative replacement progress. So it's 115 units, which is 10% of our goal of replacement. Another thing, just to go back on why we selected this phase rather than maybe one closer to the light rail. There's two factors. One is this particular phase wouldn't need an extensive amount of street infrastructure to be built in the first phase, which is it's a costly process to build streets and to redo it all. Its location along Jackson Street and along 5th Street is advantageous that we could kind of have a block that's ready to go with just buildings. The other kind of development strategy that we wanted to incorporate or thought about is if you build kind of 6-story at the bottom here, the land value around the light rail station is likely higher given its proximity to transit. It's going to be higher than the north of the property. So if we start building first, there's a way to kind of build value as you go down. So you kind of incorporate that into your financial, understanding of the process. That as soon as you get down to the bottom, to the southern part, those buildings are more valuable. And if there are the possibility for mixed income units to be added, those would be more valuable there at the time once the project's kind of towards the latter end of finishing. So phase 2, again, we build a building on that site that we took down. In this case, E1, we're calling it, these are just kind of letters to distinguish themselves from the existing numbers. E1 would yield around 147 units, and that's about the amount of units that are in these 3 cruciform buildings on the top. And so we build one of those U-shaped buildings I spoke of earlier that has a courtyard that could potentially open up to Mama Johnson Field. It's southern exposure to get more light in. And then we create a building that could be phased with an addition on the back, or a block addition to the back. So 2 buildings on this block, not just one big one. The next phase, we continue the process, build E2, build D, which gets 260 units, and all of a sudden, they're getting a critical mass of existing buildings that can be moved, residents that can be moved into those buildings to clear way for the site to be redeveloped again. So that's, this is phase 3. As you can see, we're getting, we're replacing at this point 481 units. So you're already up to phase 3, you're about 42% of replacement units built already. So phase 4, continuing on the main campus, building blocks, block C, block B1. These 2 would yield a lot of units as well. And also, a thought is to get the senior buildings, which we are coming to the conclusion that they are worth the structures to be saved, but probably need to be substantially renovated or even got renovated to keep them, but to bring them up to modern standards, including elimination of studios that are not desirable for seniors and not even allowed to be built for seniors anymore in the current codes, current affordable housing standards, and kind of modernize those 2 buildings. In order to do that, we probably need to move out at least 50% or more of those residents to do that renovation. So in this case, there is having a lot of units to be, we're building in phase 4. The thought is that Monroe Gardens could move in along with these buildings that are close to the light rail station. They could move into block C, and we're thinking that block C could be a great new senior building that is again kind of centralized to Mama Johnson Field, kind of bringing a senior building. I think would be a interesting urban design move to have in that field. It also could provide less parking ratios, which would work for a building this size to have kind of smaller amount of parking, but create kind of an energy there with a mix of ages in the housing authority property. Another thing to note as you go through this and review this, we've added some blue dots along the streets, and every phase that needs new streets built is what those blue dots come in. So you can see in phase 4, this portion of Marshall Street and this portion of 4th Street would be built at this phase to make that make the circulation work, make the fire access to those buildings work at those phases. And then going forward, phase 5 is where you can see now that we've incorporated Monroe Gardens. It's finished in this phase, it gets finished in this phase. We've studied adding, because we might lose some units when we take out studios and add 1-bedrooms to this, we want to kind of preserve the amount of units on that site. There's a possibility of adding some kind of liner residential additions that would, one, kind of close off the back of the building, which is currently a parking lot that's opens the block, not great for urbanism. So we could create a kind of a lined edge to that to allow the additional units lost there to kind of preserve it. And then therefore then the 126 units that are in Adams could move to Monroe. And then in this case, Harrison, the big Harrison units, they're both 100 units each or 98 units each, I think. That's a hard one to move if you don't have enough units ready, right? And they're also, this is a major block that is blocking streets and wants the street connection. So these ones, Harrison could move into block A and block B2 at this point. And I forgot to mention, let me go back just real quick because this is an important point. It's for after phase 2, even when we move in all of these units to these ones, we start getting, we still have leftover units, right? So the way we've been approaching this up to, for most of this study is that those could be mixed income units that get incorporated into these buildings and provide both revenue and kind of a diversity of income in the neighborhood. So there's, not a ton in this phase. The next phase, because we're utilizing moving the senior building in, you're only getting 12 units. That could be a wash when it comes down to things in the construction. The unit types might change, but the next phase you get with the addition of Monroe and the addition of these big buildings down here, you get another 125 units. So there's the strategy of, again, mixed income units incorporating in. And at this point, when we start getting these big mixed income numbers, larger mixed income numbers, we're almost to the point of complete replacement. So we're at a 92% of all the units being replaced at that point. We can talk about later, the possibility of trying to get most, if not all of the units replaced before adding mixed income. The residents, the 1354 number gets replaced and then add buildings. It's much harder to do with the phasing, but there could be some blending of that strategy. So phase 6 is kind of the final big move. Christopher Columbus needs to be renovated too, or it's the same. While it is, within a context that is a little more developed in the north part of Hoboken, or the mid part of Hoboken, excuse me. I think we just, it's the same type of buildings that want to be replaced down here. They're aging. They're small actual apartments, not a lot of bathrooms. So the thought is that they would move in this phase to block F2 and G. You still get, with the addition of Adams Gardens, you still get 250 extra units. Again, if this is all 6-story buildings, to keep kind of the baseline. And then finally, then after Christopher Columbus, gets residents get taken care of, those buildings could be redeveloped. We looked at this block, the observations of the block now. It's a very pleasant park in the middle of it. It's a respite from the grid around it, and the fact that there are not a ton of public or even private open spaces available around there. The mature trees also, spoke to us, and we considered, making a full block on this, but I think keeping and preserving a mid-block ground level open space with the tot lot or other uses would be a valuable, qualitative addition to this plan. And so we wanted to keep, we essentially just made 2 identical buildings that are still 6 stories with parking underneath, but keeping that plan in the middle to kind of preserve the very nice feeling that you get when you're in that space. So this is kind of more of an illustrative. We just added trees and a little bit notion of that this park would be a designed park that could have multitude of uses, as well as a very urgent, very necessary stormwater retention, stormwater resist, where it could store stormwater. And if you look at the kind of the federal grant funds coming from HUD to redo Hoboken's flood strategies, one of them is to provide actual mechanical pumps to pump out certain areas, and this would be a location of somewhere underground that could pump water to higher ground in those cases. And so the total site program you see here, we replaced our 1,154 that we were looking at. Again, the 200 units at Fox Hill are in addition to that total the highest target of 1354, and then total new or gut renovated. So all of the units that we've built in this is right now it's at 1,782, and we should all note at this point that these are seemingly look like specific numbers, but we should think about this as an estimated number. So that brings an additional new units to 608, which is a significant amount of units, possible mixed income units. So, you know, a big question to the board, a big question to the Housing Authority in general is how many units do you want to build beyond your replacement? If it's not much, then maybe we take a look at lowering some of these buildings, reconfiguring the plans a little bit. If it's the same target, maybe it stays the way it is, or maybe there are ways to even increase density. Again, by the light rail station, where there are taller buildings already, there is an obvious relationship with transit, walkable transit. You want more density closer to the transit station. There's some possibility for that there too. So that's kind of one of the next steps, is to understand the desire and the developments, you know, strategy that you guys see as your future here, and then work backwards a little bit from that number to understand what these building types want to be. These are some just additional perspectives, kind of showing, you know, a substantial width to that park now. That gets you a buffer from the train tracks. It gets you very valuable, you know, parkside frontage to these buildings that used to be just, frankly, you know, undefined and unsafe back of the project. And then this is just another axon of the front, showing Mama Johnson as kind of the community hub. So almost done. I got 2 more slides here, and then we're looking forward to hearing your comments and helping you digest this so you can ask more questions on Thursday. But this is just a kind of a high level, you know, schedule. We have a lot of good professionals on our team. Higher Gruel has been helping us with the local development processes to understand how long this is going to take. So like Mark said in the beginning, the completion of this report and the study hopefully will be done. You know, if we can gain consensus with everybody involved here, it will be done in the early part of 2022. After that, there is a redevelopment plan process in the city of Hoboken. It's a lengthy process. You know, 9 to 18 months is you know, could be even longer than that. You know, depending on complications.
Watch your mouth.
I'm just being, you know, have to be real, but that's a pretty good, you know, 16 months is a pretty good one, at least for the initial phases. Pre-development, which is all the financial approvals and development permits, and is another 1 to year and a half span. Resident relocation process is, you know, within this, that's kind of a sliding scale. If things are rehabbed quicker and buildings are built quicker, then that process can slide. But that's that has to be part of this and has to be respected. That's you know, as we all know, that's the whole point of this, is to improve the lives of your residents and housing in minimizing housing insecurity. In first phase, groundbreaking, you know, optimistically, 24 to 30 months after this report's done is kind of just a framework of how to think about how long this is. And then, you know, as we've been telling the residents, the full phase build out would be, you know, much longer than that, several years to a decade probably of building. But that's what needs to be, you know, that's the nature of a development like this. And at the end, we just listed some questions for you, as well as some next steps. A preferred mixed income unit count is important to understand where we stand on that. Possible, you know, with that, if we wanted to go more or less, the height changes and the plan changes could flex with those desires. Phasing strategies, again, we spoke with the development committee on this about front loading the replacement units. You know, it's a trickier process to do that, but I think there could be some ways to at least expedite some of the movement of residents into earlier phases. Infrastructure costs, you know, the cost to do this park and these streets, this is something that will need the board's attention and to develop a plan with, to create a collaboration with the city, to create a collaboration with New Jersey Transit, understand what kind of funding opportunities exist already, what funding opportunities might be in the works already, to use as leverage for those, as well as, even the simplest question is, do these streets become public streets, after a certain point for maintenance related reasons, things like that. Construction pricing, we're starting to, once we get more of a final number on the program, we can start our process of understanding the overall costs, understanding that there's an upcoming resident survey happening. There's going to be some questions about this process in there, understanding, the desire. We heard from some residents, albeit not the majority, but some that said they might want to live in other parts of Hoboken. And if that's an overwhelming, desire, how do we plan ahead for that, and possibly getting other sites or building denser in offsites. And then the timing of the senior building renovations as it pertains to funding sources and feasibility on those could want to be earlier in this phase, but would need to take into account the idea of using attrition or moving people around to kind of empty those buildings out without building a new building first. They would still stay in the project, but within the housing authorities portfolio, but not. We need to get those people out to renovate earlier. We'd have to figure that out. With that, I just spoke for a very long time. I appreciate your patience on that, and I'm going to stop talking and look for some questions. Thank you.
Director, if I may.
You may.
And the only reason I jumped the gun here is because I do have to jump off the call in a little while, but I wanted to talk about a couple of things that I think my fellow commissioners would agree on. Commissioner Mello has, as he served as councilman years ago, he always said he did not like these smaller squatter buildings. Now, I know we have some constraints, but I would like to see some variation in heights. And I think the variation I would like to see is on that, what we're calling Block C, where we potentially may have the ability to move some of our senior population into, because I think that's where we're lacking greatly. If I remember, we had just as many applicants for one building as we did for pretty much our entire campus. So I think the need is there. And if that Block C that we're talking about becomes maybe 8 stories and we convert that into a senior building, mostly a senior building. Again, I think we should have a mixed use in all of our buildings, but I think that also gives us the ability to increase our phasing if in fact we could get the 220 Adams building empty and then create that as another housing building off the main campus. The director and I have talked about this a number of times, and I love to find other properties across our city because I think our residents deserve the same right as everyone else to live everywhere and anywhere throughout the city, from our waterfront all the way down to Jackson Street. So I personally think we should target a much higher goal of over 2,000 units. And I think we have the ability to do that with increased senior population. And then when we get to the phase of Christopher Columbus Gardens, potentially maybe even increasing the number there, and then alternating different buildings on the main campus and possibly finding other properties throughout the city as well. And they could be on the back end, right? I mean, the reality for me is, how do we make our housing authorities self-sustaining? The only way we do that is with a mixed use, with a mixed income level, with retail, with whatever we need to do to make sure it's there in perpetuity and we don't find ourselves in a situation where we can't sustain ourselves. So those are just as far as number of units, as far as phasing, and as far as the senior population. I wanted to get my 2 cents in there. The other question I had was safety concerns, where, you know, we constantly talk about it now. What was your thinking about phase, I guess that's building D that we're calling, reversing the opening toward the back of the city, toward the light rail, rather than flipping that and facing that more toward the street? And
Okay, yeah.
and just one other question, the closed private elevated courtyards, will that become a problem for enforcement for us? Those are my main questions and concerns and statements.
Thank you, Commissioner Russo. So I can jump on these. If anyone else wants to jump into on the design team, please do. But I think to address your senior housing and the building height thing, we agree. Diversity of building heights is always good. You know, that being said, there is a kind of an average height of Hoboken that's might actually be even lower than 6 stories, and a 6-story building is certainly not squat when you really look at them. You know, the buildings that are right across the street from Mama Johnson being built, and one at Catty Corner are 2 good examples of those. But that being said, so when we get more understanding of a program target, we can certainly lower some of these buildings in some cases, and if the phases make sense to do that, to kind of pop them up and down. And then in some cases, if it's desired, we can study making bigger buildings. So when you talk about an 8-story building, that changes the construction type. It changes the structure, you know, that you build it with. It's usually concrete or steel or concrete block. And acknowledging that that is much, even with affordable housing, done more often in the New Jersey metro region, around Manhattan in particular. Taking that into account, we know that this 6-story as a baseline study was done as a kind of an economical, practical level. But when we get feedback like you just did, that's when we can start talking about bigger buildings. I think we've actually mentioned building C possibly being taller, the way it's kind of set back off of Jackson, as well as you know, Block A or even B2, you know, being closer to the station. And we also acknowledge we've been diving into the numbers. I think we still are getting more feedback from you guys about who's living in your community, and it is an aging population with a lot of 1-bedroom needs that we don't have, and that means that there's a lot of seniors, right? So I think that's, you know, talking about the senior population and how to design for that is crucial. You know, maybe they do move out of Adams or Monroe, or you know, is it one big building somewhere where they all live, or there's still some separation of senior buildings?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is really both, right? Because I most certainly want to increase the number. So if we have one big building that is most west in Hoboken, you know, having one big senior building on quote unquote our main campus, and then having multiple senior buildings throughout the city, like we currently do with Monroe Gardens, Adam Gardens, Fox Hill, and then even potentially another senior building somewhere else. I like to really look at this from the perspective of this is an ongoing project way into the future where we just get to add on as we move along. Yes, and we spoke to that during the last development committee meeting. It was, you know, it's that's one thing where I'm personally a big fan of regular blocks because you can plan ahead and you know that a lot of buildings fit on them. Buildings 8 years from now, we don't know what the construction costs will be or the economics at all, right? So the economy. So, but if you know, it's hard to mess up a rectangular block. Let's put it that way. Whatever you put on, right? And that's kind of like it's a beauty of that. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity to kind of drill down on the first couple phases, and then if there's a way to kind of get a little fuzzier on the way out, but understand this is your path. These are your options.
there'll be branches as you go out. And one great branch, as you mentioned, would be, let's say a waterfront parcel gets, a billionaire buys it and gives it to you guys, right? Or something like
I'm
that.
already working on it.
Yeah, good.
Right.
So, all of a sudden, then let's look at those sites. But again, we wanted to focus on what we knew and I mentioned this in the very beginning and we might have missed it, but we want to focus on what we can control now.
Yep, sure.
Yeah. And then just to answer your question about security and Block D. So one thing is that we created a two-way street along the edge, Marshall Street. So that actually faces the street. It would be emergency vehicles would be able to access all sides of that building. I don't think it would, the courtyards are raised, so it would be opening up to nature rather than opening up to a building wall.
Right, sure, sure.
That's kind of the way we thought about that. And as far as access to the courtyards, the beauty about, what you don't have right now on your property, you have a lot of space that's undefined. You have these corners that you walk into some of the corners and there's like nothing there. Even during the day, it was, you didn't want to be there. So these are controlled. These would be landscaped. Some of them might be heavily amenitized. Some of them might be very passive, but they would be just for the residents. And so that's a big worry about, the undefined spaces. A lot of the trouble happens with people that don't live in the buildings themselves. So they would be able to control those in a smaller manner. That being said, we did keep some closed, some open, with the, as far as light and air goes, to create that diversity of types.
If I can just jump in for a second too. So this is where.
Okay, and I promise this is just the last statement before I have to jump off the call. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
The last thing I say is to the director and everyone else on the call, I would love to make all these streets public, because then it is less of a burden on us, and then the city can then maintain them as well. So just food for thought.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, ladies, I'm sorry I have to jump off, but I most certainly will see you all on Thursday.
Appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Okay, Troy, I think Troy McGee had the floor.
All right.
Well, I just wanted to first of all, great job, Brian, presenting.
Yes,
Just
Brian.
to answer his question, answer the question that was on the floor about a couple of things, just so everybody knows. So go back to security. So we also did meet with the first responders at the workshop. And so that's where we were talking about the crime prevention through environmental design strategies. So even with those courtyards that we do have open, they would have access control to it. That was something that we talked with the police department about, and even ways of just, even with the size of these buildings, controlling the flow and who accesses what part of the buildings, just so you understand who's coming in and who's going out, and just being able to control that access. And then also, we understand, we're hearing this goal of 2,000, and I think 2,000 units, and I think Brian put it pretty real well of what we control at this time. And any additional land that we get, essentially, that's just going to be a bonus if we are talking about 2,000 units. And then the other piece too is, maybe there's some opportunities to go a little bit taller in the future in Block A. But this is just one thing that we just want to make clear, that there is some flexibility with this plan. And like Brian was just saying, the regular blocks really help with that flexibility, and just also a character that we want to maintain, that we heard of, keep maintaining a character that is, that states that this is Hoboken. That was something that we clearly heard. So just wanted to add those points.
I think Mr. Lewitt had his physical hand open first, and then I see two digital hands up after that. So we'll get to you guys.
Okay.
Mr. Lewitt.
Hi. The 6-story, partly wood buildings, I don't think is a big seller in Hoboken. If we're going to get 2,000 units, we need to go higher. We need to go as high as Mayor Stack will allow us to go, which I think might be 9 or 10 stories. And also, I'm not sure when we will be getting the architects to start designing buildings. But I think this design for the tenants is something to never get excited about. It looks as mundane as something can look. You know, if we can show some elevations of nonprofit, low-income buildings, that might be good to give people encouragement.
Yeah.
There's some remarkable stuff that's been done by Jonathan Rose. That's on his website. If we can show people what these buildings should look like, I think we can generate a lot more excitement than we're generating now.
That's a great point. You know, as a planner, we need to kind of get the framework and understand numbers first. But I think going forward, you know, we showed just a few pictures in this presentation, but the more the better on that. And I think even our when we show 3-dimensional renderings, articulating the buildings in a manner that looks better and less mundane, because it is just a block plan right now, and it's not, you know, this isn't what would we want to happen either. None of these buildings will want to look the same. You know, there's going to be a diversity in style and diversity in many, even on a short block facade, you wouldn't want to have the whole building the same.
Right.
The same
And I
exact
think
thing. So, Jonathan, we've worked with Jonathan Rose ourselves, and we that's a great resource. Thank you. And just to get your point on the buildings, we heard you on that. And again, it's about the amount of units you guys desire. It's also about the types of buildings that can get funded through the sources that you have funding for. And that's something we just need to keep talking about. And if we can do some of them like that, that'd be great. But another big part of a block design like this is understanding parking. And if there is a, you know, especially if you work with, you know, development teams to kind of understand what's needed for the mixed income portions of this, there's going to be some parking. And when you go taller with buildings, especially 8 or 9 stories, it's tremendous pressure on the parking, and it often doesn't work. You'd have to go either underground or build structured parking well above it, and then that would very much change the nature of what this neighborhood would look like. So we're conscious about appropriate height. I think Commissioner Russo's point about building C, the senior building, where parking loads might be lower, might be a good opportunity to go higher, or buildings that are closer to the transit where you can really start thinking about very low parking ratios.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, and block and plank construction, I don't think is much more than wood construction, and it's all masonry.
Yes, we want to tap your resources and experience when we start getting more into the pricing. We've been starting to talk with our pricing people, but understand what the options are. You know, again, it's for this market, and then knowing historically how this goes. Right now, when wood prices are very high, things tend to equate out and balance out. But you know, in other times, wood could be cheaper. So, I'm sorry. Who was next? Was it Commissioner Reyes?
I've got a couple questions.
Okay.
It's Commissioner Impastato. Brian, you had a great job with the presentation. Very informative. My first question is in regards to, there's a lot of mentions of, we've listened to the residents, we've heard, and I know there have been several meetings, but have you conducted a survey of a lot of these items, and so that we can see the data points where residents have responded, so that we're truly listening to what their needs are?
We have not yet. I think Mark, we're in process. They're in process of creating a resident survey, and we were discussing trying to get as much as we can of this process into there, but we haven't done one. That we've been relying on kind of personal both the RAB board reply back and as well as the 3 resident meetings that we've had.
So in your past dealings with other housing authorities and projects similar to this, was the survey always done after the planning stages?
Troy, do you want
Seems like
to answer? Troy's a lot more experience in on the broad range of that. I think it's a mixed bag in my experience, but go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, that's correct. It's really been a mixed bag where it really depends on where you're working. Some have already done the survey even before we actually got started. And then some, you take a survey of the plan. Once the vision has been created, because you've listened to the residents and you receive their feedback, and this is the result of their feedback. At least that's what we hope. But then you do a survey on that to get additional feedback from the residents, just to make sure that we're on track. If you want to look for an example of where it was done, after this plan has been created, Norfolk is one of those where there was a survey that was done. There was a survey that was done after the master plan was created.
Sure. Because, and I thought I pointed this out way back when we initially approved you guys as a planner, but, when I print out and look over the Vision 2020 plan, there are a lot of striking similarities between what you guys have done here and what that plan had. And that's almost 20 years ago. So maybe, obviously this is Monday morning quarterback, but we could have took that plan and recirculated it and done a survey on what people thought they liked and didn't like of that plan on the highlights and kind of go from there. Obviously there's a lot of time spent on this, and we're going to have to spend more time on surveys and getting feedback, and it's just something to think about. Maybe we combine both and say, what did you like about that? What did you like about this? Because believe it or not, it was a very dynamic plan at the time, and like the leadership then or not, I think it's irregardless of the fact that a very innovative plan was struck almost 20 years ago, that with all the technology and all the innovation that we've seen over the last 20 years, to have a lot of striking similarities speaks volumes of what that plan was. So, I hate to be spending more money on things that we already have, time and energy on things that we can already have gotten, but just wanted to comment on that. I thought maybe there might have been some surveys. I think it's extremely important. I think a lot of you would agree that we show evidence and data that our residents are the ones behind what some of these phrases, when we say the feedback that we have received. I just don't think there's a lot of trust there yet with this project from our residents. And if we can show clearly the data from these surveys, I think that will go a long way, and it will help your case. It will help our case as a board. So that's my 2 cents there. My second question is on the build first. So right now we're looking at 1A. I'm curious what the cost to build. What's the initial cost to build out that 1A site?
Is that something from that's something that we're still working on, getting the data for that? Like just some initial ideas on that.
And my other question with that topic is, and you mentioned this already, but the other spots that we potentially have that were highlighted on that grid that are not ours, maybe owned by the city or owned by other people, are we looking at those? You mentioned it's bonus, right? If we can get them, but when we talk about build first properties, are those properties going to be Like, are we going to ask the city, hey, can we get this plot as part of our build first so that we can kind of speed up this process a little bit? Or is it an after fact? Are we selecting the build first and then we're going to go ahead while that's happening to try to secure some of these other properties? Because this is going to take a long time, man. And as you look at that demolition and build structure, the residents that are living in the last buildings to be demolished and moved, you're like, I don't know, we're almost 15, 20 years away from that, I would think. Seems like it. So, if we could speed that up, that would be obviously, I think, the intent. So where's the discussion lie there in the timeline with talking to the city or talking to some of these stakeholders to acquire some of that land?
I can quickly answer. I think, again, we as planners, and then we at this very moment can control and plan for what we have and make, even just to understand how many numbers this can yield. And we were hesitant to do any kind of assumption that we could get something and not get, and then just not get it. So this is something that the board and the housing authority needs to decide too. I think we've been coming up to some of these issues, saying that we're not going to go negotiate. That's not our purview. We don't know the local politics, and the other big factor of that is when you publicly say we'd like to do this land, that land instantly gets more expensive, right? If it's not city owned, for instance. So there are some things that sometimes I think some housing authorities or clients would come to us first with an understanding of the reality of those types of deals. And if we can get to a more clarity on some of those, then we can certainly incorporate it. But it's it's kind of a chicken or the egg.
Yeah, are you hinting at, and maybe Mark or Harold can jump in here as well.
Mhm.
Is it advantageous for us as a board to start the talks and negotiations, or just see what's up with some of those properties? For example, that substation property with the city or other stakeholders, to get that ball rolling now? Or are we just so far ahead, so far like early stages that there's so much room that we can't even do that yet? Where are we on that? That's kind of where I'm trying to get at.
Right. And let me jump in. We've had a couple meetings now with the city planning department to discuss this, Commissioner, and I try to identify properties and potential areas that we could go out into. We're also talking to one particular person that has a development agreement with the city as well. And if during this process any of those bear fruit, we would love to do them. And if one were to walk in the door tomorrow, that would be great. But in the meantime, we have been talking to the city planning department and the department of the city to see what's out there. And if those are possible, they can easily be integrated into this plan. I think as Brian said earlier, we'd love to have that other piece of property. And as the councilman said, he's got a couple of things he's looking at as well. So we're on that. Commissioner, we're talking about other properties we can get, but I think for the purposes of our initial plan and good urban design principles, we want to get started, and I don't think we should delay for a year or 2 years until, well, great, maybe we can get this parcel, because by the time that our first phase is done, a couple of years will have passed, we can be looking for those other parcels and hopefully, moving out onto those other parcels as we move ahead. But those conversations are definitely taking place. And if we can secure one, if somebody walks in the door tomorrow and says, look, we have this plot over here and it's big enough for 200 units, we will start that conversation immediately. So yes, we need to pursue that as this plan goes along. And I think one of the beauties of the block plan here is that as this develops through its phases, we will find more opportunities. The housing authority will be on a firmer financial basis. We will be able to take advantage of other opportunities that come. But we need to start someplace. And I think it's important that we, over the next couple of months, gain some consensus on where we're going to start and understand that by the time we get to the third phase, we're going to be 5 to 6 years out, and a lot of things can change at that point. We can identify other properties, other opportunities will come, and some changes can take place at that point. But this gives us an opportunity to work and assure, if nothing else happens, we can make this a successful project on the land we own. But yes, we would love to find other properties that we can develop, other agreements with other developers that we can move forward with this on the future. But absolutely, your point's well taken. And we have been spending time discussing that and talking to other departments on that. Yes. Absolutely.
That's all I got. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, Commissioner Reyes?
So I have a few questions. As you guys know, I'm the only resident on the board. So to begin with, my first concern is that I agree that the residents here do need better apartments and better buildings, obviously, for us to live in. But my concern is we keep continuing to say that we are going to do, that we're not going to displace anyone. It's going to be the same amount of units. And I know from a committee meeting where there was a comment stated that it may not be the same amount of bedrooms that we have currently now that you guys might be building. And in a situation like that, what I'm thinking is then yes, we will be displacing individuals because some families are bigger than maybe having a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom. And I know that there was also a comment where, 4 bedrooms in Hoboken, you don't find them, only millionaires, not even millionaires can get that. You're right. But if you think that in this housing authority, there are not families that need those amount of bedrooms, then you are so out of touch with the families that you have living here, that's a problem. And that's my opinion. I know that we also discussed about putting data together to evaluate about how many bedrooms or how many families would need those amount of bedrooms so that no one is displaced. I would like to know where we are in that process. Have we done that? Have those reports been pulled? And have you guys been able to look at it? And how would that change in the development and how you guys are planning to build in the future? So that's one of my concerns. My next concern comes in for, we're talking about building right next to the first phase would be building right next to another building. Have we prepared or made some emergency plan maybe or partnership with the city or applied housing where if something goes wrong in the development of the building and individuals cannot stay where they're located, that they can be relocated to Hoboken without being displaced? I mean, because one of the things that we're saying is these buildings are over 70 years old. So we don't know what could happen once you guys start building right next to a building that's so old. So that's another concern that I currently have. And I would just like to, I'm sorry, I'm looking back at my notes because I did take some. You also stated how you guys met with the first responders in reference to, especially like the D part where it's open, I guess, towards the light rail. So one of the issues that we currently have now is where Harrison Garden is. There's a lot of, unfortunately, things that happen here. And the fact that the courtyard is open and it's accessible, they're able to run through the housing authority to get to the light rail and get away is an issue. So how would building these buildings and the way you're building it going to change the security issues we are currently having and experiencing?
Sure, that's a great question.
Yeah,
I can answer that one. I can answer that one first, Troy, and then if you want to help with
Okay.
the other, sorry, if you want to answer it too, I can. I just,
No, only thing I was just gonna say, Brian, about Commissioner Reyes' first question, which is a really good question, if Shannon or Tori can take that one. But sure, you have the one about the septet and the security. I see where you're going. We're on the same page. So please, you got it.
so I agree, Commissioner Reyes, the current layout of your neighborhood and the housing authority is unsafe, right? There's a lot of throughways that are not monitored. There are dark corners or dead corners, right? You walk into some of the smaller courtyard buildings and there's just nothing on the ground floor. It's like a blank wall in the corner. And then we also did a walk through by the light rail and you could see how that was used informally, right? So one thing is with those open courtyards that you were talking about on block D, the courtyards themselves are, because of the design, the flood elevation, they will be built like 10 feet above the street. And there'll be a fence or a wall along the edge that only residents from the inside of the building could come out and enjoy it. So this view here, think of this as like half of a building that's sliced down, down the middle. And you're looking, these black lines here are just like the guts of the building, right? Those are each floor. But then if you go in here, where these trees are, that's like the courtyard. And so that would only be accessible with your fob that you have, that the building people live in, and it would not be a throughway for people. If we do open some up, as far as not making it look like a donut, there is this building in Hoboken on the lower left corner. This is up closer to Christopher Columbus, actually, or actually up closer to Fox Hill. But this building, you can see there's a fence along the street edge. And then that means that there is like a fob to get into that piece. And then there looks like it might be even another gate when you go up some stairs up to the gate there, and there would be another possible place for controlled access. So there's ways to kind of say, this space in the ground floor here might be used for the stores on either side, but up here, it would just be for the residents. So all at least the buildings that we've designed so far, all of those courtyards are kind of protected, called them, both from floods. That's another thing. All the housing is above the floodplain and the courtyard, but it would be just for those buildings and for those residents. But the other thing is creating a grid of streets like we do helps with a few things. It helps with knowing that the grid is the same or similar. Like, every 400 feet, there's going to be an intersection that you can look around and know where you are, right? In the housing authority, it's so circuitous that it's kind of hard to understand where you are sometimes, or what's the safe part, what's the not a safe part. And having the ability to kind of anticipate with the grid system is part of that idea of crime prevention through design. So that's environmental design. That's one aspect of it. Improving the lighting, improving the ability for enforcement, be it police officers to not have a dead end where they get stuck and have to turn around and the guys get on the light rail. Those are just some factors, but those are things that are not expressed at this level of planning, but I think we should start folding those in to address those concerns, which we've heard from other residents as well. So I really appreciate that angle on that. The second, I'm going to work backwards. Just the second question you had was about the build first on the Harrison parking lot, and if something went wrong with the construction of that building or with the building next to it.
Yes, and actually like in developing the building right next to it, because you're going to be using large machinery, I'm sure. You're going to be doing a lot of different things developing there. So what happens if in the event that something happens and then it says, well, these residents can't stay here because it's not, let's say, it's not safe for them to stay here. So now what happens? What happens?
Sure. I that's a great point. That's a great point that we should bake into this plan and address. That has to do a lot, I think, with the local regulations on how a city deals with that. It's like not a standard thing necessarily. Some places have much better rights than others. But I think that there would be some, that's a great thing to hopefully that would never happen, where, you know, one of the Harrison buildings would be condemned or something like that. But I think we should plan ahead for that and understand what would happen to have a plan. It's a very, very good point. And I imagine that happens more often in a place like Hoboken with older buildings than it does in new places. So
Exactly,
Sure.
and with buildings, as you guys stated, that are so old.
yes, yeah.
Well,
Good.
I would like David Stimble to speak to this a little bit more, but it's just from my experience, because, you know, we have done infill projects, and this is where it's part of the regulations so that you're not jeopardizing the other building, that you usually have to, there are construction methods that you have to do to shore up so that impacts aren't being transferred to another building. But full disclosure, I'm not an architect, I'm a planner, but this is where David Stimble, I know he has, you know, extensive experience in dealing with situations like this.
And so, Commissioner Reyes, to your point, one of the things that can be put into the specifications, into the contractor's contract, is monitoring devices that can be installed in the existing buildings. And we've all heard of this. We all know in various infrastructure projects, they're installed on bridges and whatnot to monitor the movement of the bridges. And these devices can be installed in all the existing buildings adjacent to a construction. And they are monitored. What they're doing is specifically measuring the amount of up and down movement and back and forth movement. Back and forth we refer to as lateral, like in an earthquake, or wind. Wind can move buildings. We all know or have been in high rises in New York City that have quite a bit of sway from the wind. And all of those buildings have permanent monitoring devices in them so that the building engineers know if the building is going too far beyond what it's designed for. So none of your existing buildings have monitoring, but all of them can have it installed. And that's a great thing to be done. And you can require it for the buildings immediately adjacent, or it could be done across the campus, depending on the budget. But that can be done. And that's your first line of defense. That's your first line of protection, I should say, because those devices will tell you how much and how often the buildings are moving. And a structural engineer at that point can say, this is within tolerable limits, or it's not within tolerable limits. And we all of us, just as you are pointing out, we have to be committed to safety. Absolutely. It is routine. So this type of measuring device is routine when you're building right next to other buildings.
Okay.
And I'll just say, like, even before that, buildings won't get approved to be constructed unless the structural engineer designs it appropriately, right? So there's people in all steps to kind of review to make sure that your foundations and the walls between buildings are right. So there's, you know, it very rarely happens these days because there's so many fail-safes in place. And then can you repeat your first question? So maybe, or just did Tori and Shannon remember?
Sure. So my first question referred to as, I know that we keep saying that no one will be displaced. The same amount of units are going to be rebuilt, are going to be built in, but we have not been told that the same amount of bedrooms will be in each building. I know that we had a committee meeting and it was stated that, you know, that, well, we need 4 bedrooms. And I'm sorry, I live here. I know most of the families. I know families that have 4 or 5 kids. And unfortunately, 3 and 4 bedrooms are needed, unfortunately. So if you guys do build unit per unit, the same amount of units, but they're not the same amount of bedrooms, then unfortunately, yes, you may be displacing families because there won't be room for them.
So,
That's
Commissioner,
just my
so,
my thoughts and
so Commissioner, this is Tori
Tori,
Gonzalez.
go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
So HUD would require that the housing authority looks at everybody who's in the units, and you build to what is needed. So if somebody needs a 4-bedroom, let's say there are 50 families that need 4 bedrooms, 54 bedrooms would get built. But you're not necessarily required to build exactly what you have today, because what you have today, we already know isn't being used most effectively. You've got a lot of people in 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments that only need a 1-bedroom. Their kids have moved away. So we know that you need more 1-bedrooms than you have right now. So you would need to build those 1-bedrooms. But the plan would definitely make sure that everybody has an appropriate sized unit. So somebody who needs a 4-bedroom, even if they're in a 3-bedroom today, then you would say, okay, we need to build them a 4-bedroom. Does that help?
No, that's absolutely helpful. I know that during the committee meeting, reports were supposed to be run and provided to you guys to kind of like go over to assess what was needed, because we would know from the information that we have available. So I wasn't sure if that happened, that didn't happen. But again, my concern is that obviously I don't want to see anyone displaced. I don't want to have to see them have to move out of Hoboken, because I get it that even if if we couldn't put them in an apartment for say, and they were given a voucher, 90% of the time, they're not going to be able to find an affordable housing here in Hoboken, so which would force them to leave town. And in that case, then yes, we are displacing them because we're removing them from the community that they have been in.
So,
and we're committed to not, and we're committed to not having that happen, Commissioner. We're absolutely looking at the bedroom sizes and absolutely going to have the suitable bedroom size for every person.
Great.
We're just not going down that road. Thank you.
Okay. That's great. That's good to hear. I'm glad that's where we're going. And I just hope that, again, that we maybe, Director Recco, do think about maybe putting an emergency plan in place in the event that does happen, maybe with the city and the other affordable housing in town, where even if it's just not permanently leaving residents there, but if they had to move for a short period of time for whatever reason, that we would be able to do that without displacing them from their community. So
thank you for that, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I know this is a lot to take in, and this is a big plan that's going to extend over a number of years, and plans are like when you start on vacation and you have that roadmap and you're going across country. Sometimes you want to divert over here or over there, and over time there will certainly be tweaks to this plan as we identify those properties that we've been working on taking a look at. Can we build off-site someplace else and free up room here? Might we build in that C building a senior building so we can speed up and expedite the renovation of our elderly and disabled buildings? All of those are and will continue to be on the table, and I think that's the real value of this plan, is that getting down to the nitty-gritty is really important. So I really look forward to continuing the work on this with you. We are at a stage where we're refining. We've still got a ways to go. And I just, as director, I appreciate your comments so much, because we need to be we need to be united when we come out the other side of this. And I think it's going to be a great process for us. So thank you. Look at all those happy people.
Okay, well, I will work to get this document a download link to it. It's a rather large file at the moment, but so I don't think I can email it, but I'll send a download link to, who would be best? Would it be Lourdes to distribute to the board? Or someone at
Yeah,
that
give
housing
it to me and Lourdes, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, great. And if there are any other questions, we'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday when you can do your homework and come back with like hundreds of questions for us.
I think the residents will have more questions then.
Yeah, that's right.
Because there's
But-
gonna be a public portion.
Yeah,
Yep,
and that's
yep.
the
We're
intent
ready,
here.
we're ready for them. Yep.
Yeah, that's the intent here, is to have the residents have their say, and we are working, I think, with Barbara and Hopes on that survey as well, so we should be able to have
Yes.
that out before too long.
Yes,
Thank
correct.
you.
As long as I get the questions, we can start preparing them.
Very good.
Is that it?
So if we're done, Mark, then it would be appropriate to take a motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion to adjourn.
Aye.
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 Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
very much.
Everyone.
Very good presentation, Torty. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
All
We'll keep
righty,
working.
bye-bye.